This video is brought to you by Audible. Go to audibletrial.com/halocanon for a 30-day free trial and a free credit on an audiobook download. Stay tuned for more details. Welcome back, Canonites. It's been enough time, I think, so let's sit down and review/analyze Halo Oblivion in great detail. Released on September 23rd, Oblivion is a sequel to last year's Halo Silent Storm. Just 6 weeks after the end of that book, the Covenant is hitting humanity harder than ever in retribution for the destruction of a mighty construction ring, a supercarrier, and the damage wrought to the Forerunner ruins on the planet below. Now, Blue Team are sent to the hellish world of Netherop to recover what they can from a downed Covenant frigate, hoping something there will provide a way to turn the tides of war. If you haven't read the book yet, turn back now. I made a spoiler-free review at the time of release, so if you want to hear my general thoughts, you can click the eye icon at the top right, or you can check the description box below. From here on out, though, it's nothing but full spoilers ahead, so if you're ready, this is Halo Oblivion. Our story begins at 1403 hours on June 5th, 2526, during a battle on the planet Mezra. A Covenant armored column made up mainly of wraiths, but also featuring APCs and combat bridging vehicles, is making an approach on Nassim Bridge, the only direct route to the nearby Xenotime mine, full of materials normally used for ultra-efficient lasers and small-scale fusion reactions, and surely valuable to the Covenant. While the 24th Marine Engineering Brigades reduce this and other mines to useless slag, the 5th Ghost Battalion, the last of the militia of Mezra, is set to hold off the Covenant with the support of Blue Team. As John joins Major Bod to discuss the upcoming battle, we learn just how desperate the situation has become for the UNSC. In the wake of Operation Silent Storm, the Covenant has brought its full might to bear, with 2 to 3 colonies following per week, faster than ONI can keep up with them. Things are so bad that FleetCom has granted operational autonomy to individual battle groups, unable to consolidate battlefield intel in a timely manner. I think more than ever, this really hammers home just how devastating these early years of war were for humanity. At the rate that human colonies are being hit, all humanity would be wiped out within 7 years. In light of this, it's even more amazing that humanity held out as long as it did. On a side note, during all of this, we finally get a mention of the attack on Cersenius IV and the Corbulo Academy of Military Science, which we now know came at the start of the Covenant's pushback following Silent Storm. Anyway, as discussion continues, it becomes clear to John that the militia is more intent on making the Covenant pay for their invasion than walking away with their lives. He tries to pitch a plan that would let what remains of the battalion survive to fight elsewhere, while still denying access to the mine, but finds it ultimately futile. As the Mizranis get ready, Blue Team takes up firing positions on Sarpessi Ridge, where they would take out the combat bridging vehicles. They manage to take out one and shift positions as the Wraiths begin a heavy barrage. John initially assumes that this will keep up until the Wraiths need to resupply their mortars, but soon realizes that the Covenant is bringing in airborne cavalry, drones. He warns the 24th Marine Brigade about the possibility of incoming drones before he and Blue Team get back to work. While Fred and Linda work to eliminate the last 2 bridging vehicles, John and Kelly would provide covering fire, taking out as many drones as they can. All the while, the Mizranis rain Anaconda missiles down on the Covenant armor. As the drones advance, it becomes clear that they aren't headed to the mine, but are trying to save the bridge that leads to it, Nassim Bridge. John calls up Bod and encourages her to blow the bridge, which she is already on her way to do. In the meantime, John makes his way towards a detonator for the Karsus Flume, a second target for destruction meant to further block the advancing Covenant armor. Unfortunately, the remaining militia members are wiped out, and John's last chance to stop the Covenant advance is the Flume. As he's informing the 24th's General Artur Pahlavi, Lieutenant Commander Amelia Petrov of the Prowler Night Watch crashes the call, informing John that she is on her way to the surface to extract Blue Team, a direct order from Admiral Cole. John tries to use the 14 minutes he has to detonate the explosives at the Karsus Flume, buying any time he can for the 24th, but ultimately fails. Similarly, Fred and Linda are unable to eliminate all the bridging vehicles. When Blue Team finally reaches their extraction zone 5 minutes late, John is chewed out by Commander Petrov. The Spartan tries to defend his actions, but Petrov points out a huge Covenant air presence that they now have to hide from, a presence that they wouldn't have had to deal with had John been on time. Much like Silent Storm, we can see that John still has lessons to learn when it comes to working in the field. On Mezra, he compromises with the Misrani militia on tactics, which ends up with the entire militia dead and the mission failed. And when he was called for extraction, he delayed in an attempt to finish his mission, which put the crew of the Night Watch at risk. As I said back with Silent Storm, Troy Denning has masterfully demonstrated that we can still see character growth from John without stepping on the toes of later fiction, a concern I was quite vocal about before Silent Storm. Moving on, they receive a call from Admiral Cole, who informs them of a recent battle over Netherop, which resulted in a Covenant frigate being shot down. The frigate, designated Lucky Break, survived the planetfall intact enough that it was able to take out all but one of the recon Pelicans deployed to Netherop. Oni, wanting to take advantage of this massive opportunity, is now sending Blue Team in to secure the crash site. It's a trap. Everyone knows it's a trap. But the opportunity, especially with the recent resurgence of Covenant activity, is too great to pass up. And so Blue Team is deployed. Meanwhile, we cut over to a Covenant perspective where we find a familiar fleetmaster, Nizat Kuvarosi, now leading the flotilla of Unsung Piety, a fleet made up of intrusion corvettes, watching over Netherop, or Nabah, from the observation blister of Quiet Faith. In the wake of the attack on Zoist in Silent Storm, he was recalled to High Charity to answer for his failings. And now we have to talk for a moment about how Nizat approaches this meeting. He fasts for the entire journey to High Charity, all the while reflecting on the path that led him there. When he arrives, he hopes, if nothing else, that he can advise on where he went wrong and where other shipmasters can be more effective. When he approaches the Sanctum of the Hierarchs, he's accompanied by 10 bodyguards, shipmasters who had volunteered for such an act for whatever the result of this meeting. Nizat would inevitably be targeted by the Silent Shadow. Of those 10 guards, 7 carry small stone boxes fashioned from stone of 7 different worlds, each carrying a fragment of a glassed world. And the meeting is to be held in the Shard Chamber, which is decorated with slabs of lechatelierite, heat-fused silica collected from worlds cleansed by the Covenant. Goddamn the details in this book. On and during his reflection, we learn that Nizat has served the Covenant for over 100 years, and that's 100 Sangheili years, by the way. People have been wondering what Sangheili lifespans were like for years, and we've had ideas, what with Thelvadam being considered one of the youngest Sangheili to achieve the rank of shipmaster at 50 years old. Even by Sangheili standards, Nizat has got to be old, and he still seems to be in the prime of his life. Anyway, upon meeting the Hierarchs and presenting his gifts, Nizat is quick to identify the true enemy of the Covenant among humanity, Oni, and proposing a plan to eliminate them. The idea is to tempt Oni with some advanced piece of technology which they would then bring back to their headquarters. The tech would secretly have an artifact installed on it known as a luminal beacon, basically a Forerunner tracking device based on quantum entanglement, meaning the beacon could be picked up instantaneously from anywhere, which would lead the Covenant straight back to Oni. The Hierarchs almost accept, but they managed to discover that of the 2 luminal beacons Nizat had previously been entrusted with, one had been lost at Zoist. Only 3 beacons had been in Covenant possession, and they were impossible to replicate. Nizat's plan is rejected, and he's ordered to return to his ship to await reassignment, aka assassination. Before returning to his ship though, Nizat has to return the beacon in his possession. On his way to the vault, he, along with his guards and steward, kill his honor guard escort, storm the vault, and steal the other remaining beacon along with the device that tracks them. We jump back to the present where Nizat is informed of a Pelican landing on Netherop. With no mothership in sight, Nizat figures that a stealth ship was sent, and the Pelican is most likely packed with Spartans. In response, he launches the Guardian Spear, which would seem to be a flight of banshees meant to harass the Spartans. Meanwhile, on board the Night Watch, 2 days after the Battle of Mezra, John and Lieutenant Commander Petrov watch one Recon Pelican, a D-75 TC, meaning an earlier model than we see in the Halo games, descend to Netherop. Unfortunately, it isn't long before it's downed by plasma cannon fire. In light of this, Petrov decides that the Night Watch itself will make the insertion run rather than using the one remaining Pelican they have. That would instead be used as a decoy while Blue Force, comprised of Blue Team and 1st Platoon, deploy to capture the Covenant frigate. The landing is a rough one, full of Covenant fire, but eventually Blue Force makes it to Netherop's surface, while the Night Watch is forced to make a dead stick landing. The crew evacuates and Commander Petrov sinks the ship's self-destruct to her compad. Meanwhile, John strips the ship's water tanks. With Netherop being a greenhouse world, it's pretty damn hot and that water's gonna come in handy. The two head outside where they meet with the rest of Blue Force and the survivors from the crash, and they head out for the Covenant frigate. 2 hours and more than 8 kilometers later, the survivors find a suitable place to hunker down, where Petrov blows the ship. Just in the nick of time too, as Covenant that had been investigating the site were just starting to take off. Unfortunately, Fred, who had to clear out some potentially dangerous debris before they could take cover, is caught out in the open when the Fury tactical fusion nuke is detonated. Afterwards, Blue Force and the survivors get out of the culvert they'd hid in, and Blue Team reunites with Fred, who informs them of an oddity he saw before the nuke went off: what looked like kids riding spider-like machines. John is skeptical, but when Fred points out the clearly built highway they've been traveling on and the culvert they'd hid in, John gives Fred 5 minutes to investigate. Petrov gives them 4 as Pelicans from the recovery ship Phyllis Wheatley are inbound, and she won't have them waiting again. So Blue Team moves out. Incidentally, just because I had to point this out, a culvert is a structure that usually allows water to flow under a road or something similar. The survivors hid in a culvert, which could be considered a cave, so the cave they hid in was not a natural formation, I'm sorry. Anyway, their 4 minutes quickly expire with no results, so the Spartans head to the LZ. Unfortunately, the Pelican and accompanying base lards are shot down by Banshees, leaving everyone stranded. Petrov orders John and Blue Team to head to the crash site alone, knowing the Spartans can make the 51-kilometer distance in a few hours, while it would take everyone else a couple of days if they survived at all. John is reluctant at first, but he can't deny her logic. 2 hours later, and not much progress has been made, the highway they're following winding along. 47 kilometers traveled, but only 23 towards their target. Blue Team soon stops when they find odd coal highway markers clearly laid out by someone. They investigate only to find that Fred had been right earlier, encountering one of the spider machines he had described, driven by what looked to be children. The children attack, their spider machine quite capable of taking on Spartans. Eventually, Blue Team manages to trick the children into abandoning their spider machine, giving the Spartans the chance to capture and talk to the kids. It turns out these kids grew up on Netherop and are the descendants of pirates who had been marooned there. The pirates would have died had they not discovered what the kids call cave cities, filled with technology thousands of years old. Forerunner would be my first guess, but as the book goes on, it seems to be more likely that this came from just another extinct alien civilization, which is pretty cool. Meanwhile, however, another group of kids and spider machines called Mountain Runners by the kids are headed towards the downed frigate. Pausing a moment here, the existence of these kids is definitely something that we need to address. I'm sure with how much pirates are or have been part of the cultural zeitgeist over the years, most people are familiar with stories of pirates being marooned on a desert island. With as often as we've been dealing with insurrectionists and the like, I'm almost surprised we've never heard of this sort of practice in the 26th century. It's insane to think about leaving people to die on a world like Netherop only for them to find a secret cache of technology and survive. And not just survive, but have kids. Interestingly though, there are UNSC regulations against this sort of marooning practice, which of course makes sense. It was a terrible enough practice in Earth's past that only gets more inhumane when humanity is spread out across the stars. I'll be curious to see how the fate of these kids plays out by the end of the book. Moving on, we jump over to the Covenant side of things, Nizat Kuvarosi getting an intel update from his steward when they receive news of an incoming Covenant fleet, the Fleet of Swift Justice, soon to arrive in system. Based on its projected arrival, the fleet wants to pin Nizat's flotilla between Swift Justice and the amassing human fleet that's in orbit. To avoid this, Nizat orders the flotilla to enter Netherop's atmosphere as if they're moving in to help the downed frigate, then break away, which will put the fleet of Swift Justice face to face with the human fleet. At the same time, Nizat and his steward will drop to the surface where, one way or another, they'll ensure humanity get the devices containing the luminal beacons. Back with Blue Team and the children, they're making quick progress in the Mountain Runner, which has to be pretty massive since it can carry 4 Spartans. Unfortunately, due to damage from the previous battle, the steam engine which charges its electric battery was punctured and the Mountain Runner shuts down. While trying to figure out what to do, the Phyllis Wheatley radios in to report incoming Covenant forces. Task Force Pantea offers air support in 20 minutes. John radios in to offer support as soon as possible and informs them of the other children on Mountain Runners. The Wheatley acknowledges and ends transmission with a warning that, if overrun, their captain will use the ship as a trap just like Commander Petrov did with the Night Watch. John acknowledges, then prepares Blue Team and the kids to move out. Kelly is assigned to hide the children with the rest of Blue Team going ahead, after which Kelly, being the fastest Spartan 2, will catch up. Just as she finishes hiding the kids, however, a Covenant dropship, something like a 3-pronged Spirit with 2 troop carriers known as Umbras, flies in, landing not too far away. Kelly leaves the kids with an M6D and instructs them to shoot anything that isn't human before leaving to engage the Covenant forces. But you can probably guess how cooperative these kids are. Just as Kelly is preparing her action against the Covenant, one of the kids, Lena, sneaks up behind her, or tries to, saying she wants to help because John would get upset with the kids if they let his favorite Spartan die. Kelly is caught off guard by this, but quickly shakes it off and, rather than trying to reason with Lena, gives her 3 grenades to sling at Covenant forces when they start to pursue Kelly. Lena agrees and moves to get into position, while Kelly takes out the pilot and gunner of the 2 Umbras now that the dropship has moved away. One of the Umbras has sealed, but the other is just open enough for Kelly to fire a grenade into the troop bay. It takes out a few elites, and she then takes out a few more with her MA5C before running off, hoping the troops will pursue her. Some do, but the Umbra with the sealed troop bay soon takes off in the direction the other Spartans had left in. Luckily, Kelly had gotten a warning to them so they wouldn't be caught off guard. With the help of the kids, Kelly takes out the remaining Covenant, then they all board the second Umbra. Closer to the Phyllis Wheatley, Nezat Kovarosi is accompanied by his steward, Tam Lakosi, and over 100 troops from the Steadfast Strike, the downed frigate humans call Lucky Break. The plan now is for Nezat to feign an attack against the Wheatley, during which he'll drop the shield unit and anti-grav harness that hide the luminal beacons. They take out the Wheatley's defenses and make for the ship, only for the humans to evacuate and make for a nearby road to set up a new defense. Nezat tries to cut them off, only to lose several warriors in the process. Eventually, he calls off the advance and, accompanied by Lakosi, plans to charge the humans directly, equipped with the anti-gravity and shield units. They will die to plant these objects, and trust that Shipmaster Ko Weadosi will continue the operation against Oni. Meanwhile, John, Linda, and Fred arrive at the Wheatley crash site in the aftermath of the recent engagements, only to find the rest of the cast-offs, the children, engaging with a few remaining Covenant forces. Blue Team helps take those forces down, then approaches the cast-offs. It takes a few minutes to bargain, but they manage to strike a deal in which the kids would help Linda save Wheatley's crew in exchange for an old ship favored by pirate crews more than a century earlier known as a Sharpfin. John and Fred, meanwhile, will raid the Lucky Break. As they make their way to the downed frigate, John reflects on how he'd ended up in this situation, how he and his Spartans had been thrown into battle, this trap, on the basis of someone else's plan. In contrast, Silent Storm had been planned by the people executing it. Him, Johnson, and Crowther. They'd known what they had at their disposal and crafted a strategy around that. John swears that he would not be shy about making his superiors understand these facts in the future. Unfortunately, when only a kilometer short of Lucky Break, the frigate takes off, revealing that it had indeed been a trap. With the frigate out of reach, John and Fred sprint back towards the Wheatley crash site, where they find 2 Umbras and a squad of 10 Banshees. The Spartans manage to eliminate a Banshee with one of their rocket launchers before requesting additional support, which Task Force Pantia's Nandao squadron happily supplies. Commander Petrov also reveals that she is aboard one of the Umbras, which had been captured by Kelly, the Spartan having gone to retrieve her and as many Marines from 1st Platoon as they could carry. Nandao's squad quickly eliminates the Banshees and reports that they are able to provide air support for another 20 minutes. Further, they reveal that the newly arrived Covenant fleet, what we know as the Fleet of Swift Justice, is engaging the Covenant's stealth fleet. With the situation in orbit deteriorating, Task Force Pantia will evacuate in 4 hours, maximum. John and Petrov both acknowledge before John fills her in on the situation they've been dealing with. Something I absolutely love during this is that Petrov suggests Linda 058 pull herself out, which would mean leaving not only the cast-offs, but the Wheatley crew as well. John notes that this is even more ruthless than the orders he had received from Commander Yao on Alpha Corvi 2, where he'd had to abandon the insurrectionist Whitaker and his troops, something John had very much not been happy about and now refuses to allow to happen again. When Silent Storm was coming out, there was talk that there would be connective tissue between it and the then recent comic Collateral Damage. Sadly, I can't say I ever saw this connective tissue manifest, but like with the Forward Unto Dawn reference at the start of this book, it's great to see Collateral Damage finally referenced here. Before John could actually respond to Petrov, the Umbra starts down the path Linda and the cast-offs went, chasing after the Wheatley crew, it would appear. In truth, they are certainly after Fleetmaster Nezat Kovarosi, but John doesn't know this. Regardless, he and Fred manage to destroy the Umbra and its crew, after which he makes it clear to Petrov that he intends to save everyone, which is his call to make as John has been given command of ground operations. Speaking of N'Zoth, he is behind the survivors of the Wheatley preparing his next move. A Sangheili Ranger will be equipped with a faulty shield device containing a beacon. He would sacrifice himself in the hopes that the shield unit will be recovered from his corpse. At the same time, Tam Lakosi would sacrifice himself to plant a human homing beacon which N'Zoth had recovered from one of the Wheatley crew who had succumbed to Netherop's heat on one of the surviving crew. This homing device, of course, has a luminal beacon in it. And when the Ranger is killed, N'Zoth and the other Sangheili warriors will retreat, feigning a loss in morale. Suddenly, he is contacted by the shipmaster of the Steadfast Strike, Ob Nathasi, and informed about recent events. Turns out that the Banshees had been Silent Shadow and sent after the frigate, and only by chance had the Spartans taken them out. And now, as Nathasi informs, both the demons and Silent Shadow are on N'Zoth's tail. In what almost seems like madness, N'Zoth finds himself filled with joy, exclaiming to Tam that the Spartans will be their salvation from the Silent Shadow. Meanwhile, Linda is observing the crew of the Wheatley from her constructed sniper's nest, also observing the Sangheili getting into position while answering questions from the castaway Roselle, notably about the war. Eventually though, Linda marks her primary targets and eliminates them. A few seconds later, fire is returned by surviving snipers, but before Linda can worry about that, a rock slide is triggered by engineers of the Wheatley crew, Linda figures. She has Roselle go meet up with other castoffs, then radios Captain Dakani, walking him through a plan to properly take on the incoming Sangheili with what arms he has left while she provides overwatch. The battle initially goes pretty well, but as the Wheatley crew runs out of ammo, the Sangheili begin a full sprint charge. Behind them, to Linda's annoyance, are the castoffs in their mountain runners. Linda joins up with them to lead the charge, and eventually they manage to drive the Sangheili off. As the battle closes, Linda saves an Oni scientist who was being tackled by a Sangheili warrior, obviously trying to plant the homing beacon on her. After being saved, the Oni scientist asks about the Sangheili with an unusually strong energy shield, and if they can recover its shielding unit, which Linda agrees to help with. Meanwhile, John, Fred, Kelly, and much of 1st Platoon make their way towards the survivors in the captured Umbra, all the while John contemplating how odd the Covenant's behavior has been, how little sense the charge on the Wheatley and the hunt after the crew has made. He doesn't have much time to ponder though as they continue to make their way towards Linda and the Wheatley crew. Along the way, they run into Roselle and some other castoffs, who reveals that the black smoke the Umbra had been following was from a mountain runner, the spider-like vehicles using a coal-powered steam engine that recharges the batteries that actually make it work, and the black smoke from, of course, burning coal. With renewed hope, John reaches out on team comp for Linda finally making contact, Linda updating him on the situation. Upon arriving, John is approached by Captain Stockin, the Oni scientist, asking to recover the shielding unit. She emphasizes that they need the entire suit as they don't know whether the shielding unit works with or without it, which of course further complicates the situation. With the 21 castoffs and 28 Wheatley survivors, plus the 20 John included that had just arrived, they have 69 personnel to move and only capacity for 52 people. Commander Petrov again suggests leaving the children, but John refuses, determined to find a way to get everyone home and complete the mission. Luckily, it turns out that the coal bins and the mountain runners can be removed, making enough space for everyone to be moved in a single trip. While that's sorted, John gives Linda an after-action report, which just further confuses him. The Covenant had hunted down the Wheatley crew, then suddenly withdrew towards where the Lucky Break had headed. To John, the only logical answer is that they needed the Phyllis Wheatley for some reason and had tried, and succeeded, at capturing a senior officer's datapad. While the castoffs and Wheatley survivors make their way back to the support ship in the Mountain Runners where they can request extraction, and if extraction is unavailable, they can try and take off in the Wheatley, Blue Team and 1st Platoon take the Umbra to hunt down the remaining Covenant troops. Soon enough, they reach a thicket of plants, noticing 4 paths cut into them. So, Blue Force dismounts and splits into 4 squads, 1 Spartan each with a Marine fire team behind them. Just before entering, John requests an extraction in LZ from Task Force Pentia in 15 minutes. Inside the thicket, the team encounters a couple ambushes but nothing they can't handle. On the other side, however, they find the Lucky Break and a Spirit dropship waiting for them. Unknown to Blue Force, N'Zoth and his survivors are waiting nearby, and the Spirit is one of the Silent Shadows. They manage to destroy the Spirit, but some of the Silent Shadows survive and engage Blue Force. N'Zoth takes this chance to make for the Steadfast Strike, but the Silent Shadow fall before he makes it, opening up his crew to fire from Blue Force. For a moment, it seems like he'll make it, but a Gigas-class fighter-bomber swoops in, destroying the frigate. By the way, the Gigas-class fighter bomber has only previously been mentioned in a description for the Halo 3 flight combat harness. Took 12 years to finally see the thing in action, bless you, Troy Denning. Anyway, 2 honor guards and a Helios Ultra disembark from the Gigas and, approaching N'Zoth, demand the luminal beacons returned if he wishes for a swift death. N'Zoth asks after the fate of his fleet to determine if the receivers for the beacons survived. The Ultra reports that only the Quiet Faith and Silent Truth survived. N'Zoth hides his relief and says that the receivers were aboard different vessels. In response, he is stripped of his armor and marooned. Meanwhile, Blue Force had retreated to their LZ and is extracted. As they depart, John sees 8 armorless Sangheili watching them go. In another direction, he's able to see the forgotten highway they had traveled, lined by hundreds of culverts, the last remains of a civilization that had disappeared millennia ago and long since been forgotten, the same fate the Covenant wished for humanity. Inside the Pelican, John finds Captain Stockin, the dead elite, and Roselle and Samson, 2 of the castaways. Unfortunately, not everyone made it off Netherop, including Commander Petrov, whose Mountain Runner had run out of power before they made it back to the Wheelie. To her credit, her last communique had been to ensure the Spartans were extracted. 5 days later, aboard the Valiant-class cruiser Everest, John meets with FleetCom brass at a Court of Inquiry hearing. Attended by Admirals Cole and Stanforth and accompanied by Dr. Halsey and 2 members of the Judge Advocate General Corps, they try to figure out where the op on Netherop had gone wrong and clarify certain events. With Roselle and Samson in attendance, John can guess at what those might be. As the inquiry goes on, one of the Judge Advocates tries to find out if the cast-offs had deliberately stranded Commander Petrov on Netherop. During this, we learn that the Covenant have seeded the planet with orbital mines. Though the UNSC doesn't know it, this is to ensure N'Zoth's exile remains permanent. As the inquiry continues, they review the promise made by John to the cast-offs for the Sharpfin escort corvette and the UNSC dropping them off on any planet of their choice. Ultimately, the panel agrees to honor their request, and to everyone's shock, the kids request to be dropped off on Gao. The proceedings conclude with Stanforth making the kids promise not to reveal anything they experienced on Netherop, which they do. The book comes to a close with N'Zoth, now referred to as a World Master, and other Sangheili watching Commander Petrov as she cooks what N'Zoth refers to as plant pads. While his stewards wish to ambush the humans, stealing her supplies and even eating her, N'Zoth is not so eager, seeing her as a gift from the gods, and a gift from the gods is not to be misused. So they continue to sit and watch. Meanwhile, N'Zoth's one hope for redemption lies with Ko Weodosi, and whether he'll be able to finish what N'Zoth started. And that concludes Halo Oblivion. Goddamn, what a story. After the amazing dive back into Master Chief-centric fiction with Silent Storm, Troy Denning again delivers a powerful and satisfying story with a grounded military sci-fi focus. While I was sad to see the cast of Spartans significantly reduced, hopefully that can change for the next book in the series, the added focus on each member of Blue Team was a welcome addition. As I noted in my spoiler-free review, I do feel like Linda and Kelly, while represented well, got a bit shortchanged in comparison to John and especially Fred. John, I do expect to have a lot of screen time, that's just natural, but with how much focus Fred gets in Denning's other series, I would like to see less focus on him and more on the ladies of Blue Team. Still, what we got for them is great. I love diving into Linda's thoughts on combat practice, the time leading up to battle, etc., and as much as I have been a John-Linda shipper, the book absolutely seals the John-Kelly relationship that I think is more commonly supported in the community. There's a moment when John leaves Kelly to babysit a group of cast-offs who point out John's subtle preferential treatment of Kelly. Kelly denies it, but there are definite hints that the two might feel for each other more than they feel for their fellow Spartans. I'd love if that got to be explored in whatever comes next. Speaking of what comes next, we gotta talk about that. The way this book ends, there's no way there isn't going to be a sequel in the next year or two. What will be interesting is whether there's a large time skip as Shipmaster Weodosi executes N'Zoth's plan, and how that will affect N'Zoth and even Petrov. I also can't help but wonder if the shielding unit that was recovered, though a trap, might lead to something. In current canon, the breakthrough with energy shields for Mark V came from a reverse-engineered Jackal shield gauntlet recovered towards the end of the war. While I doubt that will change, I'll be curious if this leads to any other developments, maybe a connection to the energy shield tests conducted with the Grenadier variant of Mjolnir in 2535, I don't know. Perhaps more interesting is how things may connect to Mr. Denning's post-war series. A while ago on Reddit, I joked that both the war era and post-war era series would conclude with a single book, and while that certainly won't be the case, it's funny that the cast-offs decided to go settle on Gao, even asking John to promise to visit them. I wonder, whenever Troy decides to return to that post-war series, if we might see any of the cast-offs reappear as adults, or see their children or something. That would be very interesting. Whatever the case, I can't wait to see what comes next. If you've seen my spoiler-free review, you know where I stood on Oblivion at release, and my opinion hasn't changed since then. Halo Oblivion is still a 9.5 out of 10, an absolute knockout. That wraps up this review, but look forward to a more in-depth look at Halo Battleborn Meridian Divide later this month. Until then, this has been Halo Canon, and I'll see you all next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this, be sure to check out Audible. By going to audibletrial.com/halocanon, you can get a 30-day free trial and a free audiobook. Audible's selection is unmatched and includes all the Halo novels. You can cancel at any time and keep any audiobooks you've purchased. So check out audibletrial.com/halocanon today.